Right, so it's about 4:30, and we're all just kind of sitting here in silence. So I assume we're ready to get started? Yes, no, maybe so. Anybody, anybody?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
ready.
I'm ready. It's a little strange. I'm used to having someone tell me when it's time to start, but I'm assuming we're just going to jump in and get going?
Sounds great. I'm
Sounds
excited.
great. I'm excited. All right. So I'm not sure how many people are watching. I can see 3 people on the live broadcast at the moment. I know Alice posted the link for the jump in, so if anybody's watching and hasn't joined in and wants to join in on the live video, the link event page on the Google Plus page for it. So I'm Meredith Martin, and I am an elementary school teacher in lovely New Jersey, southern New Jersey. Let me specify. There's Prince. And I've been teaching here for 17 years now. Scary thought. Started out as a first grade teacher, did that for the first 3 years, and then was asked to consider taking a position in the computer department, teaching basic computer skills to the little kiddos. Took that on, did that for the next many, many years, and then probably about 2 years ago, I started seeing more and more about STEM and STEAM and maker education, and just hearing all the talk about it at conferences and online, and kind of got sucked into it. And now I am currently running a lab/makerspace for our 4th through 6th grade building. And I also do mobile makerspace at a lot of teacher conferences and events and workshops in the tri-state area here on the East Coast. So that's kind of become my bailiwick lately in the education world, is sharing and talking about makerspaces, STEM, STEAM, and all that good stuff. So I am perfectly happy to ramble on and on about STEM, STEAM, and making, but if you guys have questions, please, I encourage you to jump in, interrupt me, ask anything you might want to know about it. Otherwise, I'm just going to ramble on. Sound good?
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, great. So when I talk about makerspaces, I generally start by going, okay, well, what the heck are we talking about when we say makerspaces? And the neat thing about makerspaces is that it can mean different things to different people in different situations. There's a lot of jargon out there: STEM, STEAM, makerspace, fab lab, hackerspace, whatever. But what they all boil down to is basically hands-on learning. The idea behind a makerspace, a STEM lab, or anything like that is to get people involved in being creative, in using their hands, in getting physical with their learning. It's a huge departure from book learning and lecture learning in that the people participating are taking ownership of their learning. When you think of a traditional classroom in particular, our classrooms haven't changed much over the years. The classrooms that we see today in our schools are not much different from the schoolrooms you see in the old pictures from the 1800s. You generally have a teacher at the front of the room lecturing, and you have students lined up in desks in neat little rows. And it's basically a top-down learning. The students are imbued with knowledge by the teacher who knows everything at the front of the room. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. And more we're seeing students leaving the education world and going out into the workplace, and they're middle skills. They don't have creativity. They don't know how to innovate. A lot of them don't know how to think for themselves. They don't know how to work in a team. They can't do projects outside of step-by-step directions. And the nice thing about the makerspace type of class, if you will call it class, is that it's teaching people to do those kinds of things. Makerspaces in general are student-driven. They tend to be very hands-on and very collaborative. The idea in a makerspace is that less that there is a single expert on everything, and more that everybody is an expert in something, and your job is to find the experts that can help you and team up with them to work on what is interesting to you. A makerspace can be as formal or as informal as you want it to be. Generally, when you start to go more formal, it tends to be called more of a STEM or a STEAM lab when you are doing more formal lesson type of things, when you're working on integrating a lot of the standards along with it. And all of this can be done in a general makerspace, but in general, when people talk about the term makerspace as opposed to STEM or STEAM, they're talking about a more relaxed environment where maybe there aren't really set lessons, but more of a place for people to come and tinker and experiment. So often our kids have interests outside of what they're learning in class, and we don't really give them a chance to experiment and to expand on those interests. We have a large population of students who may not do very well in traditional academic type of assessments, but give them something to do that's hands-on, and they suddenly have a new way to show what they've learned and to share their knowledge that doesn't necessarily work the same way as a written test or a worksheet or filling out bubbles. And for a lot of students, it's the only chance they get to really shine and show what they're capable of. Just finished reading a book recently, the the Maker Movement Manifesto, which, if you're at all interested in makerspaces, I can highly, highly recommend the book. And it talks about the growth of makerspaces across the country, both in schools and out in public settings. And it also talks about the reasons why makerspaces are so important and the types of people that these spaces can really reach. And a lot of the things I see with my students here in the lab and when I'm taking the makerspace on the road, a lot of the things that are mentioned in the book as well. So I highly recommend taking some time to check that book out and read up on it if you are interested in more about the maker movement. You can go as big or as small as you want with makerspaces. In my case, I'm very, very lucky that I have a humongous room dedicated to my STEM lab. It used to be our computer lab, and when we went one-to-one Chromebooks about a year and a half ago, we didn't need it as a computer lab per se. So rather than let them, waste the space, I said, let's turn it into the STEM lab. So we gutted it, renovated it, and have turned it into a wonderful space for our lovely STEM lab here. But not every school has access to an entire room. And I hear that a lot when I'm out at conferences talking to teachers and administrators and curriculum folk, that space is at a premium in schools. But as I said earlier, the nice thing is that you don't really have to have a dedicated space for a makerspace or a STEM lab or whatever you want to call it. You can set them up pretty much anywhere in any space you have available. Libraries have become a hot spot for making. I believe most likely because libraries tend to be very creative places in general, and what better place to share creativity. And you can also tie in a lot with literature and making. There's a lot of great things that can go along with that. So libraries, media centers, those become great spaces for maker spaces. You can set up a maker area in a corner or an unused part of the room very easily. In talking to other people in other districts about setting up makerspace areas, there is a school district not too far from where I live that wanted to do something in terms of a makerspace for students, very informal. And in talking to the principal, he ended up deciding to set up tables in the hallway. Students are in a middle school and they're switching between classrooms, and the transition time in going from class to class was occasionally disruptive. So he wanted to give the kids something to do during that transition time as they're going to lockers, as they're moving between classes, as they have that 10-15 minutes of free time in between. So in setting up his tables, he decided, well, we've got all these old PCs laying around that aren't really much use anymore. You know, they're too slow or too old for them to be of use in a classroom, but they still work. So his idea was to take one of these desktops, disassemble it, and stick it on a table in the hallway, and let the kids know they were welcome to tinker with it and try to put it back together and get it working. No one-on-one. It was just out there with the instructions. Go for it. See what you can do with it. And within a couple of days, he told me afterwards, the students had the computer put back together and up and running. Now that in and of itself is pretty neat, but nothing major. But what really was awesome was after the fact, he was approached by a group of students. And normally you don't get a group of students coming together to go to the principal's office to talk to him and tell him about something they want done, especially in middle school. But these students approached him and said, you know, we really thought that was cool. We liked that idea, but we have a better idea. We want you to set up another table with another computer on it. We want to keep girls who can put them together and get it working the fastest. And these kids were so engaged, were asking for more. So he set out another table for the girls versus the boys. And eventually another group came to him and said, hey, this has been fun, but we want something more challenging now. We want to have a programming contest. Now that we have these computers up and running, we want to have a challenge to see who can program the best game or the best, you know, computer program using these computers, and something like Scratch. And so these students went from a very simple, here's something we took apart, reassemble it, and are now going much, much further with it than anyone ever expected. Excellent, excellent school that this happened in. It's a Northfield Community School in New Jersey. Principal is Glenn Robbins, and Kevin Jarrett, who is another big proponent of the maker movement, runs the STEM lab there as well. Lots and lots of great stuff going on in that school building. Even if you're not doing it in the hallway, one of the things I've used in my classroom is a makerspace in a box, basically. I have a lot of different activities that are relatively simple and easy to the little guys, and might be able to utilize the STEM lab and do some STEM activities with the students even when I'm not here. So boxes, and each Xerox box has an activity in it, and in the box are the supplies needed for a full class to do an activity, and any instructions or handouts that go along with it. And now it's in a manageable size box that can be taken to a classroom. It can be brought into the lab itself and done there, and everything they need is right there in the box. I was talking to another school district at a different conference, and they loved the idea so much they decided to implement it during their inclement recess days. When the weather's bad, the kids can't go out to play. They are stuck in the cafeteria after lunch. So they go in and they set up some maker boxes, and now tables in the lunchroom that are well behaved get a chance to work with one of the maker boxes. And I did see a question pop up about what's in the maker boxes. That's a really good question. There's a lot of them, and you can come up with pretty much any type of hands-on activity you want and throw it in a box. On my website, which is techforteachers.com, I'll post it on the event page in a minute or two. I tend to post all my different activities that I do in the lab, and I also have a folder in Google filled with tons and tons and tons of activities that I tend to pull from when I'm putting together a maker box, and I'll post that on the event site as well after this is over with, so you guys will have those resources there. One of the easiest maker boxes to put together is an engineering box. There's a ton of great things you can do. I actually have a couple different engineering boxes, one of which is spaghetti and marshmallows. You can come up with a lot of different challenges for that. Just uncooked spaghetti, some regular marshmallows, stick them in a box, and the directions can be anything from who can build the tallest tower to who can build the device that holds the most weight. You can give them unlimited access to the materials. You can limit the amount of materials that they have. Very, very easy way to get started with engineering. Toothpicks and mini marshmallows work well, as do toothpicks and gumdrops. I use gumdrops and toothpicks for making geodesic domes with the students, and we talk about shapes and the strength and the materials and how it works. Looking over at some of my other activities that I have in a box here. Let's see what else is over there. Bristlebots. Bristlebots are always a big hit. If you haven't heard of these are so much fun for grown-ups and kids both. The idea is that you get a small vibration motor, like the kind that's in a cell phone or a pager, and you hook it up to a coin cell battery and glue it down on the head of a toothbrush to make a little vibrating robot. Those are the initial Bristlebots, but they can be expanded to anything. We've made Cupbot, we've made Pool Noodle Bot, and all you basically need is a vibration motor and a coin cell battery, but then you can add on to it. You can design mazes for them, you can race them, you can modify them. Very great way to get kids interested in circuitry and basic electronics. You can add in LEDs and things like that. And the easiest way to make one of those, I've actually found, is with a pool noodle and an electric toothbrush from the dollar store. The little vibration motors that you can buy, if you buy them at some place like Radio Shack, they're ridiculously expensive. If you just get one of the electric toothbrushes from the dollar store, you pop in a AA battery, and boom, there you go. You have your vibration motor. And you've also got, the extra toothbrush to work with if you want to do something with it. We just shove the toothbrush down inside the middle of a pool noodle and turn it into a little vibrating robot that way. When I take the mobile makerspace places, probably the most popular activity, and this goes for both my students in class and people at conferences, has to be marshmallow catapults. If you have not made a marshmallow catapult, you are totally missing out. All you need is some popsicle sticks, some rubber bands, a plastic spoon, and of course marshmallows. The idea is to design a catapult that's going to launch the marshmallows. When I do it with my students, I usually start out, we do a catapult step by step together so they get the general idea. And then for the second part of the activity, I ask them to go in and redesign it, improve it. How can you make it throw further or higher? And the absolute most worst behaved audience for an activity like this has to be school administrators. Almost every single time I do this at a workshop or a conference and I get a group of school administrators coming to make catapults, they end up doing horrible, evil things like challenging each other to launch marshmallows up on top of the hanging light fixtures in the library so that the marshmallows will melt. I love school administrators. They're so much fun when they get hands-on with this stuff. One of the other things that they like playing with are glow sticks. You basically take an old set of Christmas lights, chop it up into smaller chunks, and connect it to a 9-volt battery to make it light up, and then you can use it in different projects and activities. I mean, watching the superintendent sit there and zap himself on a 9-volt battery because he decided to connect the wires while it was the battery is always endlessly amusing. So when I talk about people enjoying things like makerspaces, I'm not just talking about the kids. The adults love it as well. There's really no age limit when it comes to makerspaces and getting hands-on. I have yet to meet someone who doesn't like coming in and playing with all the different materials. In my lab, I tend to do more structured activities that tie in with the standards, administration, but I also try to kind of schedule in some more unstructured activities because I feel like people, my kids in general, need to get a chance to experiment and try out some of their own ideas. One of my most recent activities, I've just started learning more about the design movement, design thinking, and that's becoming very, very popular in education as well. And the idea is to kind of pull in all of these things. It's very interdisciplinary, cross-curricular. very creative type of thing. And one of the activities we did as a warm-up for this is called Ready, Set, Design. And it comes from, I believe it's the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York, which is part of the Smithsonian. And the idea behind it is that you give the participants a challenge, a design challenge. And the design challenge can be something as simple as, I need to get my lunch to school. I need to get groceries up several flights of stairs. I need to stay dry when it rains. And then you give each team a bag, and in the bag are just a few simple materials. 2 or 3 structure materials, 2 or 3 covering materials, and 2 or 3 connector materials. So, for example, I would give my students a bag, and it would have 2 coffee filters, a couple rubber bands, and some popsicle sticks in it. So they have the connectors, which are the rubber bands, the structure, which are the popsicle sticks, and the covering, which are the coffee filters. And they would have to design a product using just those materials to make their prototype to meet their design challenge. The other trick is they could not design something that already existed. So, for example, I always drove them crazy. One of the challenges was, I need to keep my hands warm when it's cold. The first thing that comes to mind when you think of that is, of course, gloves, mittens, hand warmers. Well, nope, sorry kids, those already exist. You can't invent those. And there would be horrible moans and groans. But what I discovered was, by the time they'd been discussing in their groups for about 5 minutes, all of a sudden the moans and groans changed, and then the excitement started to appear. And the I can't do this turned into, let me try this instead. Wait, I have a great idea. Let's try this. I've never seen the kids so engaged in my life. It was amazing. And some of the inventions that they came up with were truly innovative and well thought out ideas. From there, we continued on and had them come up and present their ideas to the class, and they had to be able to answer questions about their product afterwards. And of course, I get a bunch of kids who go, oh my gosh, it's Shark Tank. And they went nuts. They loved it. So they're up there. Some of them put together whole infomercials to come up and share their products. So that was our warm-up activity, and we've moved on this week to a more in-depth design. We're actually using a tool called the Extraordinaires Design Studio Pro. It's a great little kit. It costs about $80 at Barnes & Noble, and it is amazing. It comes with a set of challenge cards, and the challenge cards are in different categories: gadgets, inventions, clothing, buildings, transportation. And it comes with a set of customer cards. So not only are they designing a product, but they're designing it for a specific customer. One of the things I love about it, though, is that they're not just normal customers. They are things like aliens and vampire teens and spies and astronauts and evil geniuses. And each of them is a little quirky. For example, the alien, the first look at the alien card, you see a giant rampaging alien tearing through a city and zapping people with ray guns. But if you look on the back of the card for more information, you find out that he's actually a little kid alien, and he's catching humans to bring into his class for show and tell. So the students need to think outside the box and realize that their first impressions aren't always the whole story. The kit also comes with a bunch of think cards, which give them questions to think about as they're designing. And this is a project that's probably going to take us a couple months to go through, because we're going to be following that goes so well with STEM and maker spaces: the asking questions, imagining, planning, creating, modifying, improving, communicating. And the groups will be working together and, giving each other feedback before we design our final prototypes and then present them. So something like design thinking fits in really well, particularly if you don't want anything super structured. It's a great open-ended project for the kids, and they have been absolutely bonkers for it. One of the things that I like about makerspaces, and that a lot of people don't realize, is that you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money to have a good makerspace. When people think of makerspaces and STEM, one of the things I hear people say over and over again is, oh, but we can't afford 3D printers, or we can't afford robotics kits or electronics. Well, you don't have to. If you can get those for your makerspace, that's awesome. I would never turn them down. And we do have a couple of 3D printers in here, and we're lucky enough to have a Little Bits electronics kit. But 99% of what I do in the lab here uses either dollar store materials or it uses easy recyclable materials. I am the queen of free and cheap. I don't really have a budget, so I have to go out and hit up all the dollar stores and request donations from parents and teachers and students to help supply the lab. But it's turned out to be very easy to do with just a few simple materials. There are endless amounts of things you can do with items from the dollar store. My dollar store people around here think I'm kind of crazy because I will come in and fill up a couple baskets with completely random items. And they're always wondering what I'm going to do with them. But like I said, some very simple things like the popsicle stick catapult can all be done with dollar store materials. The engineering challenges with pasta or toothpicks and marshmallows and gumdrops can all be done with dollar store materials. We talk about chemical reaction, pop rocks, soda, and balloons to check out some chemical reactions and talk about gases and things like that. Lots and lots of great little activities that you can do that don't cost an arm and a leg. There are so many great resources out there for it. Like I said, I'm going to post a link to my folder of materials that I'm always adding to. Pinterest is a terrible time suck, but also a wonderful source of resources for making and hands-on. And the other thing I can recommend is looking for area. In my district, I'm pretty much the only one that's gung-ho on making and STEM and hands-on learning. But I find that through Twitter and conferences and workshops that I go to, I've found a great group of other educators from my general area, just not in my district, that I could then share this passion with. So we've started holding what we call like Hack Sundays. A bunch of us educators get together at a pre-chosen location, whether it's a coffee shop or someone's classroom or someone's office building, and we'll spend the day working on little hands-on projects and planning out ideas and activities that we can then take back to our schools afterwards and possibly do with our students. Look for public maker spaces in your area. In New Jersey, I have to be part of the largest makerspace in, it's called the Maker Depot up in North Jersey. And although for me it's a 2-hour drive up there, it's well worth it because I get to go talk with other makers who are interested in the same thing I am. I'm working with them to develop their nonprofit arm of Maker Depot Academy, which is designed to share curriculum and materials with other districts and schools to get them started. I see a great question, how can we look for them? Twitter is a wonderful resource. If you're not on Twitter yet, you should be, and I know Alice will definitely back me on that one. Check out the MakerEd hashtag, the STEM and STEAM hashtags, conferences in your area. Check out some of the maker workshops, talk to the people there. Check your local libraries. One of our local libraries in town has a makerspace in the library. They're just getting started with it, and it's a great way to find other people who are interested in the same type of thing you are. Go out on Meetup, see if there is a Meetup group in your area. Do a Google search for makerspace or hackerspace in your location. And best of all, if there isn't a group out there yet, start one. Something like Meetup or Google Plus is a great way to get a group of people together and say, hey, I'm interested in making. Who else wants to come join me? Like I said, we get together, even if it's just for an hour at a coffee shop to trade ideas back and forth and work on small little projects. It's a great way to get in touch with other educators and get them interested in it. Maker fairs are also wonderful. There are several large maker fairs. I know the Bay Area has one every year. New York on the East Coast here for me has a maker fair. Actually met quite a lot of fellow maker educators at the New York Maker Fair this past year, and I'm already looking forward to October of next year when I can go again. There are also mini maker fairs all over. So if you check out the Maker Faire website, you'll find all sorts of activities going on with that, and those are perfect ways to meet other maker educators who are interested in the same things you are. So what other questions do you guys have for me? And feel free to unmute and just jump in with questions, comments, whatever. Now you're all just going to sit here and very quietly stare at me.
Where did you come up with the idea? Or for catapult?
I totally blame Pinterest for that one. As I started looking for STEM and STEAM activities on Pinterest, catapults come up quite a lot, and I'm not sure exactly why they're so popular, but I have a feeling it has to do with A, how much fun they are, and B, how much learning can be done with them. When I introduce them to my kids, we talk a lot about the angles, the angle of the throwing arm and how that affects what's going on with how far and how high it throws. We talk about things like force and velocity, and distance and measurement with it as well. There's a lot of math that goes into something like a catapult, as well as a lot of history. It's a great tie-in with social studies if you're doing ancient cultures. Siege engines alone are utterly fascinating to kids, and I'll freely admit, to me as well. I have a whole collection of 3D printed desktop siege engines that I have at home that I used to, launch marshmallows and pennies and Q-tips at people when they annoy me. But they're such an educational resource because the kids are so excited to learn. All I have to do is ask them one question about it, and they pick it up and start running. And some great activities tying in art with the catapults, not just with designing your own version of the catapult, but also with using the catapults to launch paint-covered materials like pom-poms dipped in paint, and creating works of art that way, launching them at canvas or fabric or paper strung up on the wall. Great way to talk about gravity. Lots and lots of neat things you can do with the catapults, and like I said, the kids go bonkers for them. When I do it here in the lab, I do make them wear safety goggles, which they think is absolutely hysterical, and they're also told they're not allowed to launch them at any of their classmates. They're only allowed to launch them at me. They think this is amazing until they realize the reason I tell them they can launch at me is because none of them have ever managed to hit me with it because their aim is so terrible. They can be 2 inches away and still completely miss me with their catapults. It's great.
That's awesome. I was trying to figure out how you would be able to incorporate the catapult project with history, but yeah, using it as a siege weapon would definitely work.
It's also great in the fall for current events. I don't know about on the West Coast, but here on the East Coast, we have this lovely sport called pumpkin chucking, where people actually design full-size siege engines to launch pumpkins across fields as far as they possibly can. It is a big event here in the farming communities. So you'll see there's a huge pumpkin chucking event in Delaware every year, which is about 20 minutes from here. And everybody gets sucked into pumpkin chucking. So the catapults tie in with that very nicely as well. Henry, you're being quiet. You can ask a question now. I'm going to be that terrible teacher who calls on people and they don't want to be called on. So what else do you guys want to know about makerspaces and making and hands-on stuff?
Well, I actually had a question about, you said your district doesn't do it as much as you do. What do you think that is?
I think it's a very new concept for people. And if it's one thing I found is that the education profession in general um, does not deal well with change. It is a sad but true fact. Um, and in some instances, I can understand that. In I know are so much piled on them that they are just trying to get through everything in their classrooms that they need to get through in order to meet their goals, to meet the curriculum needs, to have the kids prepared for the lovely standardized testing that they do every year. And it's hard for them to see the value in taking time out to go hands-on. And it's very easy if you aren't familiar with makerspaces and STEM and how they work to walk into a makerspace or a STEM lab and go, well, it looks kind of chaotic and crazy, and it looks like the kids are just playing around. And to the uninitiated eye, it does look a lot like playing around. But in reality, these kids are learning while having fun. Um, the motto in the lab is if you're not a mess, you're not doing it right. We are chaotic in here, but it's controlled chaos. And we still have a lot of teachers who don't know how to deal with students outside of that teacher as supreme fount of all knowledge. Students must be sitting in quiet rows and listening. Whereas they walk into my lab and the kids are talking a mile a minute. They're zooming around the room. They're playing with different materials. There's stuff all over the tables. There are kids climbing on the tables. And yet, while it looks completely bonkers in here, the kids are under complete control. They're fully engaged in what they're learning. They're going above and beyond the basics of what I'm asking them to learn and to understand, and going off on tangents and doing research on their own to find out more about the topics we're studying. And the more that the teachers come in and see what's going on in here, the more they realize that, wait, this is actually very valuable educationally. When they see the special ed kids, my resource room students, my BSI students, my self-contained students who come in and are suddenly, you take students who are struggling academically, you take students who have behavior issues on a regular basis, you take students who are not very well adjusted socially, you put them in a makerspace or a STEM lab like this, and suddenly they're a completely different child. They are engaged, they are enthused, they are talking with others, they are interacting appropriately. One of the best things about working in the lab is that I have not had a single behavior problem since I started the STEM lab. I mean, behavior problems were rare before, but yeah, there's always those handful of students that you hear about from all the other teachers, and oh, this one's having a meltdown today, or this one's being defiant today. And the teachers still feel the need to give me a heads up before the class comes into the lab, and my response is always, it'll be fine. And it's true, they can come in as cranky and as defiant as anything. Within 5 minutes, they have completely forgotten what they were upset about, and they are laughing, and they are learning, and they are sharing, and it is really amazing to see. My kids who struggle academically, very often they're the ones that their classmates are turning to ask them for advice on things when it comes to working hands-on or thinking creatively and outside the box. Those kids are the ones that are suddenly the top of the class. And it's really great to see the happiness on these kids when they realize that, yes, you do have something valuable to contribute. Maybe you struggle with reading and language arts and are, below grade level. But in here, that doesn't matter. You can still learn. You can still be an expert in something. You have something valuable to share with the rest of the class. And I think that is a big reason why we need a lot of these maker spaces in education and outside of education too. I think a lot of adults need them as well. And we're going to have more of that silence again, aren't we? All right, so have any of you tried looking at Instructables.com? Yes, no, maybe so.
Haven't.
Oh, you need to. Um, While my main resource tends to be Pinterest, I have recently discovered the joys of Instructables.com. Instructables is basically a crowdsourced instruction website. You can post directions and step-by guides on how to do just about anything. And there are so many great activities that can be pulled into a makerspace or a STEM lab. I was browsing through while I was waiting for 4:30 to get here for this to start, and just collecting activity after activity that I want to incorporate into the makerspace and the STEM lab in the next year or so as I go through. Lots and lots of resources there, and what I like about that is because it's a crowdsourced website, anyone can contribute. So you can introduce your students to that. They can find activities that they want to do either in school or at home on there, but they can also begin to share their expertise by writing up their own sets of Instructables, whether or not you choose to have them post them publicly on the Instructables website, or whether you have them do it privately to create a class or a school building version of Instructables that becomes a resource for everybody in the building. And I also have to say that's one of the reasons I love doing the dollar store STEM so much, is because although things like the printer and the robots and the electronics are great, not many of my students come from backgrounds where they can afford to purchase these things. 3D printers are still out of the price range of most of my students' families. Same thing goes for a lot of the robotics and electronics. But if I'm doing an activity in here that uses straws and popsicle sticks and pipe cleaners and coffee filters, those are materials my students can get their hands on outside of school. Wow, that was fun. I just got kicked off for no reason. Hopefully it will continue to work. But as I was saying, the materials are easily available either at home or at the dollar store, and my students, if they are interested in an activity, can then go on and continue their learning at home without having to go out and purchase a lot of high-end materials. We did the egg with my 5th graders last year, and they loved it. And we just used very simple materials that I had around the STEM lab, and they were limited to a certain amount of materials for their egg drop. Took them up on the roof of the school and had a big egg drop day and launched them all off the top of the building. And the number of students I had who came up to me afterwards, all excited, going, I'm going to go do this at home. We're going to throw them out my bedroom window. I'm sure there must have been tons of parents who were annoyed at me about this, but this made me very excited because my kids were excited about what they were doing, and they wanted to keep on learning and experimenting even when they left school. And I think that is an excellent thing to have happen with my students.
So for the egg drop, they had to create something that wouldn't allow it to break.
Right. They had we kind of tied it in with the Mars lander because Mars has become a hot topic lately. The kids are all interested in it. So we talked about, the topic of getting humans to Mars eventually, and how they not only need to get there, but they need to be able to land safely. And when you're trying to land something like the Mars rover, or in particular humans, you really don't want them to come in for a super hard landing and end up with humans spattered across the landscape. And so their goal was to use these materials to design a prototype lander that would safely launch an egg off the top of the building and have it land unbroken. And they went nuts. They had so much fun with that, and They absolutely loved it. They had to write up journals about it afterwards. We kept track of everything that they were doing. Reflection is great when it comes to STEM and maker activities. Wonderful way to tie in the standards. I almost always have my students do at least a little bit of writing after a project or during a project, because you can tie in a lot of language arts standards with that as well. And it also makes them think more about what they're doing. Our current design project, they have a design journal that they are keeping throughout the project, and each time they come in, they get 5 or 10 minutes at the end of class to write down their notes, to write a reflection about what they're doing, to jot down their ideas, their questions. You know, what worked, what didn't work, what do you think you would do differently next time? And I think that really helps the kids a lot. Not just for me to be able to pull in the standards, but to get the kids thinking about what they're doing even once the project is over. You know, why didn't something work? What could I do differently? I think they need to not just give up if something fails, but they need to learn to continue to revisit the problem. First day of the STEM lab, we kind of have our intro lesson and we talk about the STEM lab. And for all my new incoming classes, I ask them, what do you think the most important word in the STEM lab is? And guaranteed, they're all positive words that the kids come up with. Teamwork and sharing and doing your best and science and math and technology. And I stand there and I go, nope, 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 wrong, nope, not even close. And finally they get frustrated and they go, well, what is it? And when I tell them that the most important word in the STEM lab is fail, I get complete deer in headlights looks. They are shocked. They don't quite know how to react to that. But they need to understand that when they fail, and they are going to fail at things in their lifetime, that is not a reason to stop and give up. Too often I see the kids have been trained that if they fail at something, oh well, I'm no good at it, I give up, I'm not going to do it anymore. In here, we treat failure as a first attempt in learning. That's what the letters in FAIL stand for. And their goal is to stop if they fail and go, why? What can I fix? Can I change? What can I do next to try and make it succeed? I want to build that resiliency in so that they're not just giving up if they hit a brick wall, but they're looking for ways around it, or over it, or through it, or under it. And a makerspace or a STEM lab is a wonderful place for them to kind of fail in safety. You know, failure is not the end, failure is just the beginning. And it takes us to being conditioned for so long that failure is a bad thing. Failure is not necessarily a bad thing. Failure can just be something that drives you on to better things. And we're about halfway through the year now, and I'm finally starting to see them loosen up and get comfortable with the idea that, yeah, we're going to fail, but that's okay, because we're going to keep going and we're going to do it even better next time. And that is one of the things that makes me very happy about doing what I do.
Do you feel that the lack of creativity sometimes have conditioned kids to have that give up mentality?
Definitely. One of my best friends here in the building is the art teacher, enough to be right across the hallway from each other. So we're always popping into each other's room during our breaks in between classes. And in talking to her, she sees the same things I do. The kids are so used to having step-by-step-by-step directions, to being spoon-fed and led in specific directions, that they're losing the ability creatively, and they don't know to think outside the box or to do something on their own without a set of directions. You know, I try to give very broad directions and not a lot of the fine details, because I want them to experiment. I want them to try things that they might not normally think of. And in both my class and in the art classes as well, we both notice that the kids have really been struggling with that, because they are so conditioned. You follow step-by-step-by-step directions, and if you fail, that's a bad thing. Whereas in art class, in the STEM lab, and in real life, that's not the end of the world. Everybody fails. We don't always get things right the first time. It just means we look at it differently. We keep on going. And that's what myself and the art teacher both are trying to train back into the students, is that creativity, that innovation, that eagerness to try new things and not be afraid or be crushed by a single failure. Anybody else with questions? All right. If you guys don't have any other questions, I am good to go. I can post those links for you on the Google Plus page for tonight and share them with you. Anything else before I head out, gang?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been wonderful with the questions. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, guys. In that case, have a wonderful evening. I am off to meet a bunch of other crazy educators for dinner in Atlantic City and see what I missed at the Texpo conference today. Have a wonderful night, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys again at some point.